What's up, brand builders? Stephen Hurahan here on the Brand Master Podcast, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Shanghai-based founder and executive creative director at Design Bridge, Mr. Tom Gilbert. Now, Design Bridge is a 35-year-old global agency with studios in London, Amsterdam, Singapore, New York, and of course, Shanghai. Now, Design Bridge have worked on some amazing campaigns with some amazing brands as well, including the likes of Durex, Guinness, Smirnoff, TNT, and Save the Children charities, to name a few, and their work really is top drawer. And in our chat today, Tom shares his journey to such a coveted position in such a prestigious agency, as well as his ideas and philosophies on the processes of global branding agencies, how all work includes strategy, and how experience design is the bridge between brand and marketing. So if you want to get a taste of what it's like to run strategy sessions with global brands and how to design experiences into your brands, then stick around for this episode of the Brand Master Podcast. Welcome to the Brand Master Podcast, a show specialized in helping branding professionals and entrepreneurs to build brands using strategy, psychology, and creative thinking. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brand Master Podcast. And I'm delighted to have Tom Gilbert on the show with us today. Now, Tom is the executive creative director at Design Bridge there in Shanghai. Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, and I'm looking forward to getting into a chat with you about many things, including brand experience, experiential design. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invite.
Now, I want to run through a few questions in relation to your role where you are, because just for your knowledge, a lot of our listeners are either building brands themselves or they're professional brand builders. So there's a lot of interest in, top agencies, the processes they go through, what's important to them. Can you tell us first a little bit about your journey to how you became a founding partner and an executive creative director there at Design Bridge in Shanghai?
Yeah, well, I suppose I thought these questions like how far back do you go? Because it is a bit of a cliched answer to this question, but I do feel like I was one of those kids that started in a very creative zone, because even as a kid I was sort of really interested in art and things like that and making things, but it wasn't until teenage years that I started to realize what that could eventually be. So kind of naturally grew into being an industrial designer, which is what I'm trained to do. And that's what I studied at university. So in 2010 I ended up moving to Singapore and joined Design Bridge. So I've been with Design Bridge for 11, 12 years now. And in that whole time period, I've again meandered a little bit in different roles, but it's mainly been starting in industrial design, leading an industrial design team here in Singapore. But then as things developed and experience design started to become terminology within the industry, we also started to evolve, and we went from just industrial designers to having CGI artists and environmental designers, events designers, digital designers, motion design, and we started expanding the team into a really kind of mixed discipline team, and a lot of collaboration, to the point where we would, even from Singapore, we were doing lots of projects globally for some of our studios. That was really good until 2017, when they gave me a new challenge to go to China and start the Shanghai studio. So that's the founding partner part of my title, right, is that I'm the founder of the Shanghai studio. And I went there start of 2018. And yeah, I've been the ECD of Shanghai ever since. There is one tiny blip in that, is that I'm now in Singapore because of the pandemic, and I've been stuck here.
Yeah, you got shut out, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. So I've been working remotely ever since. But in some ways, that's also been an interesting journey, because I've now become this kind of accidentally become a bit of an expert in remote working. Wow. Because I was just thrown into the situation at the start of the pandemic, and all of a sudden using lots of different tools that you weren't using before in
Yeah.
order to keep things working.
Yeah,
So that's also been
absolutely.
good. Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of that as well. Like Miro has really taken off. It's a great tool. But
Yeah.
it's great to hear that kind of background, coming up from the working class, being thrown into, the private school sector, and all the different elements of your journey, and really going into freelance as well. So you were a freelance graphic designer, were you?
No, industrial design.
Industrial designer, okay.
Yeah, working in the branding industry, which people also find a bit strange, because you're like, wait a minute, yeah, isn't branding to do with graphics? But
Yeah.
as we probably know, and a lot of your listeners will know, that it's much more than that. Actually, it's a multisensorial. Branding is multisensorial, and 3D form is obviously a huge factor in that. So there are industrial designers that work within the branding industry, creating different physical experiences.
Well, that's something that I want to jump into you about a little bit later on, is that experience. But really, I mean, I understand from my role that there are so many different facets of design when considering the brand, but even I hadn't considered the industrial element of brand design. So it's kind of great to see that. And anybody who hasn't come across Design Bridge before, take a look, Google Design Bridge and have a look at the work. It's some awesome work. It's really great work. And then, I like to have a look at what top agencies are doing out there, because it's, just to kind of get a feel for that top level work. It's really awesome. The work that you guys do is really great. But how would you actually position yourselves, or how do you position yourselves as an agency? What's your target market? Because you do a lot of different things within the realm of design. What's your position, and do you have a focus on branding and brand design? Tell me a little bit about that, and a little bit about your target market.
Yeah, definitely. So we're a global brand design agency. That's how we'd describe ourselves to people, but obviously that's quite broad. So how we're positioned really is it's to do with having very close relationships with multinationals. Really, so we've got a lot of long-term relationships with multinationals. And Design Bridge is 35 years old, and some of those relationships go back 35 years.
Wow.
So when I say multinationals, we're talking about companies like Unilever or Diageo, and the big multinational companies like that traditionally were in kind of consumer goods. We did a lot of FMCG consumer goods branding. But over that 35-year period, obviously we've diversified as well and work in a variety of different sectors. And the way we're positioned, because we've got 5 studios across the globe in New York, London, Amsterdam, Singapore, and Shanghai, and we're currently in the midst of opening up Mumbai as well. We've got strategic locations to help us make sure that we can deliver global brand design in all these different markets, which are the dominant markets in the world, but also make them locally relevant, instead of some other global design agencies are working in a way that's quite monolithic and kind of one brand fits all type of approach. Whereas we're strategically positioned to locally evolve the brand to make sure it fits with local consumer needs, and resonates with local consumers, so that they can kind of build that brand love.
To have that history to call upon, and those relationships to call upon, coupled of course with the amazing work that you guys do, it must open up so many different doors. Are you involved at all in the onboarding of new clients?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, weirdly, the reason today, straight after this session with you, I've got a 3-hour training session actually with a new client.
Wow.
Where I'll be kind of conducting a training session.
So what would you train them in?
It's kind of how we work. Well, I'll start actually with what is branding and talk about the principles of branding.
Yeah.
Referencing a lot of different material, particularly kind of Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow is a classic, a bit of a Bible now for marketeers. So and a lot of multinationals reference that as well. So using some of the principles from that, and then expanding that into our way of working, to help build that relationship and how we work closely together as partners with our clients, and then going into a bit more granular detail, going through phase by phase what a project might look like. So that, and we do all this at the start of relationships to really help make sure that we're all on the same page and that we know how we work.
You nearly took that question. You did take that question right out of my mouth. It was, do you do this to make sure, because these are multinationals, right? They're not coming across branding for the first time. So really that onboarding and that training is just to really clarify that this is what branding means to us. Let's be sure that we're on the same page. So that's why you run them through that training. And I really believe in the philosophy of education when it comes to clients, because at the end of the day, they are great at doing what they do. Branding is not their field. Branding is not their area of specialty. And there is an education gap often that needs to be closed before diving into the work that you do together. Otherwise, you're gonna come across problems down the road if you don't kind of collaborate, if you don't align from the get-go. What kind of challenges, because again, these are global companies, these are global brands, what kind of challenges are they coming to you with?
That I suppose that question keeps evolving as it's so heavily linked to culture and global trends as well. There's a lot of kind of sustainability challenges going on at the moment, which is great that we're in part of, for sure. Other trends that I'm experiencing is premiumization. I mean, some markets, like especially in China, there's still a big surge in premiumization. Some of other markets experienced that probably 10, 15 years ago. I remember at the start of my career in Europe, there was a lot of this kind of premiumization and good, better, best strategy in terms of portfolios. And a lot of that is going on now in China. So we're doing a lot of things like that. I don't want to, I'll use the word nationalization or nationalism, I suppose. But we all know that trends like things that happened in the globe, like Brexit and Trump going into power in America, and countries like China being quite nationalist as well, that brands are having to adapt more locally now to be more locally relevant to countries that are getting that national pride back now, rather than constantly thinking about globalization and having like one brand that fits all over the world. I definitely feel like in the last 5 or so years, probably a bit longer, there's been a little bit of a pivot there where people are starting to adapt their brands a little bit to make them feel a bit more locally relevant in different markets.
It's the whole Marty Neumeier ZAG principle. There's been such a push to globalization in the past few decades that it becomes this overworn path that there is no differentiation there anymore, and kind of taking a step back to look at the benefits of this sense of national pride in the way kind of, let's say, Paul Smith does, embracing that culture. There's a lot of there's a lot of credence to that strategy now when you see the globalization of so many different brands and how indifferent that is now. Do you, of course, when you take on a new client, you obviously bring them through this training process. I'd imagine that's the very beginning of the very first step of a longer process. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that process looks like, or is it different for every client?
Yeah, it is. I would say it's different for every client and different categories as well. Um, that's why we don't do training for all our clients, because some are like you mentioned, they're multinationals, that they might have their own internal training, and they're going through, and they might be really experienced, and there's different experience levels we have to deal with as well, depending on the brand, depending on the team of marketeers that we're working with. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's any kind of fixed way of working in that sense. It kind of, we do obviously have our own principles and our own kind of framework of way of working, but yeah, it evolves per client. Make sure, and to link with theirs, some of them have their own structures and ways of working that we're constantly adapting and trying to get each other to align.
So how do you get to that problem? Do you run a workshop and ask questions to really define and make sure that you're zeroing in on the right problem?
Yeah, we can do sometimes. If it's a big challenge, then we'll run an innovation workshop or a design sprint and things like that. We've got a strategy for innovation kind of framework as well. So if it's a big strategic challenge, like some of those things I mentioned before, then yes, there'll be a whole phase of work, whole project really on before you even get to a design brief, to really find out how different ways that we could take this problem or opportunity and get it into some design briefs. So that's kind of more of a classic design thinking approach.
Yeah.
But a lot of our work actually comes already packaged in the form of a design brief.
Yes. Okay.
And the client will give us quite a specific brief of they want to rebrand or launch a new brand or launch a new product. At which point, obviously, that's a little bit more straightforward, and we will get a project team together, and including the client, lots of questions, making sure that we're all super clear on what the brief is, and then we'll come back with a proposal to run through how we're going to approach the project. We all align on that. It gets signed off by the client before we then proceed with the project.
And how involved would you be? So obviously you've got this broad background, you've come from this teaching background, this industrial design background, leading into graphic design. How involved are you in the likes of strategy and story? And did you find that there was a transition there at all, or did that come to you quite naturally?
So yes, definitely. I'm very, very involved in strategy. We all are within DesignBridge, because we see ourselves as a very strategic brand design company. Every project we do starts with strategy.
Yeah.
And also all the way through the process, there's different strategic needs to help in whatever phase it is. So, and it's interesting you say storytelling as well, and because that is one thing that we believe we're really strong at is the element of storytelling. And it's particularly important when it comes to brand design, because a story is very emotional, and we're in the world of emotional connection. We really want to, for consumers to experience that positive emotional connection with the brands that we work with. So yeah, like strategy and storytelling is a huge part of everyone's role actually within DesignBridge.
Yeah. So do you take on execution only type work? Do you have clients coming to you saying, we just need this creative execution? Or do you say, well, no, we start with strategy. We want to make sure that we're solving the right problem first.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's rare that we'll take on an executional job we might do for some of our long
Hmm.
term partners because we know them so well already
Yeah.
that we don't need to have a big strategy exercise.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's we see projects that are more executional, or even when you go into the world of experiences, we need to understand the brand strategy. We need to understand their consumers in order to create a strong brand identity and a strong visual identity for the brand, or multisensorial identity,
Hmm.
before we can do these kind of executional things.
Hmm.
So yeah, we always make sure we've got all those two things covered off before we get into execution.
Yeah. You touched on there on brand experience, and I know that there's a lot of talk these days about brand strategy, even storytelling, and there's also a lot of talk about marketing execution. But there is a bit of a gap there that kind of needs to be closed, which is brand experience. And there are a lot of brands out there that completely skip the brand experience. Can you tell me a little bit about what your definition of brand experience is and how important that is when developing a brand?
Well, I don't know where I heard this stat recently, but I was listening to something or reading something, and they were saying that 80% of consumers' interaction with brands is often disconnected from the product itself. It's kind of, we're now living in this world of a complex like marketing ecosystem
Hmm.
where you're getting influenced as a consumer from lots of different angles, lots of different channels, different brand touch points. And for a lot of brands, they're quite fragmented, those those different channels and touch points. They're so often kind of executed by different teams,
Mm.
or they're quite siloed within the organization. So they're not quite connecting. So
Hmm.
the way that we approach it is about connecting all those fragments into kind of one coherent story, one
Hmm.
coherent brand story, and then also a consistent visual and multisensorial um, application, I suppose, to make sure that every touch point
Mm.
is feels right for that brand.
Hmm.
And we also talk about how like your brand's only as strong as your weakest touch point.
Hmm.
Because yeah, if a consumer has a bad experience with a brand on a certain social media platform, um, and that's been undervalued or something, they're like, oh, it's only for that, so we'll do that, and they have a bad
Hmm.
experience, it affects your whole brand experience and
Mm.
the perception of the brand. So we're constantly making sure that we're kind of thinking big. So think big about the whole like ecosystem, the whole brand world, and how it all connects. But then also at times having to dive in deep and zoom into the detail to make sure that you've got that consistency and that quality, to
Hmm.
make sure that every touch point is executed to the level that represents your brand image.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying about the siloed or the fractured brand experiences, from big brands to small brands, because sometimes, as you said, you will have a social media department over here. They're kind of doing their own thing and maybe sticking to some brand guidelines, but not really. They might have a style guide, maybe. And then over here, you have the customer service team and they're doing something completely different. Then you have the marketing team writing direct response marketing. And as you said, it can be very fractured. Do you have a look at your, before thinking about designing a brand experience or experiential design, do you look at a brand and audit all its touch points? And then how do you make those connections and bring everybody to the same page?
Yeah, exactly. So that would be how we'd start a classic. If we got a new client, or not even a new client, but if they want us to look at the overall kind of brand experience, then yeah, we'll start with an audit of their brand and look at how they're interacting with consumers in all the different communication or commerce channels, um, and evaluate it. Have a honest bit of feedback to the client of the things that we're observing. They also might have some data as well, because obviously they're tracking different things all the time. They'll have data that they can give to us as well. And that's the strategic element. That's of every project we starts with strategy. There'll be a lot of strategic thinking once we've done the audit, and to identify the opportunities where we can improve that brand world and that experience. Often when you do that, this is when you start to realize that maybe the brand story and the brand strategy needs a little bit of a tweak, or needs some help in order for everything to connect. Or we might realize that the visual identity system hasn't been designed in a way that's optimized for certain channels or touch points. Or they might need a few more brand assets to help them stretch into a more premium space, or to connect with a different target audience. So that's when we might have to do a bit more kind of design identity work and help them develop a suite of distinctive assets that can be used across the different channels. And then finally, we'll start working into that overall experience, make sure we've got that coherent story, and then the consistent touch points.
And would there be any sort of touch points that you would kind of stay away from in terms of execution? Obviously, within your wheelhouse, you're going to have your strengths. You're going to have your brand identity, your website design and development, and they would be kind of the front lines of your execution skills. But you might come across a brand that needs a bit more in terms of, design within their shop, for example, or certain sensorial aspects to their brand that would not be your area of expertise or strength. Are there any touch points that you would stay away from? And you would say, okay, this is the strategy. It's up to you to go away and execute that. We'll look after these 3, 4, 5, 6 touch points, but you need to get this in line over here.
Yeah, the main TV commercials is something we don't go near. And there's some amazing communication agencies that are experts in that. So we don't go down that route. We have done kind of brand launch movies or product launch movies, but we wouldn't go into a kind of short-term tactical campaign and doing TV commercials or online commercials. So that's probably the area that we don't go into, and also things like PR. And again, there's some really strong PR agencies out there and that's a complex world as well. So they're the two areas I'd say that we don't go into. We try and focus on long-term brand thinking first of all. So it's not short-term tactical campaigns, it's more long-term. So that's one reason why we don't go into those two areas. And also, we're a design agency. We employ designers, so it's make it but that's quite a broad term. There's loads of different ways of loads of different types of designers. Of course. So we just stick to the design side of things of creating things and executing things through a design lens.
So would there be how would you bridge that gap in terms of the strategy that you put forward? Would you say predominantly the strategies that you put forward include mostly what is in your wheelhouse? And how do you kind of draw those lines? Do you have partnerships, other PR agencies, for example, that you work closely with, you know them well, and you would recommend your clients go and work with them? Is that how you bridge that gap of the areas that you stay away from execution?
Yeah, well, DesignBridge is actually part of WPP. So a big multinational creative group. And WPP focus on transformative changes for brands as well. And they have a variety of different agencies within the group that we can collaborate with. So when it comes to something that's that's falling outside of our comfort zone, then we can speak to one of our sister agencies and collaborate with them.
Yeah.
So we often do that, and vice versa. They also, if there's a brand design opportunity or challenge with some of their clients, then they will also connect with us to help as well. So that's usually what we do if it's falling outside of what we do.
Yeah, and it's a great way to kind of bridge that gap and to continue to hold your client's hand rather than say, here's a strategy, you go off and execute that yourself. Of course, there is a time and a place for both, but being able to bridge that gap with agencies with broader capabilities kind of gives you that capability, that extended capability to kind of push them in the right direction. Now,
and we love collaboration as well. Like we've got, even beyond WPP, we've got a lot of partners to collaborate with. There's only 450 of us in Design Bridge, which sounds a lot, but it's not when you compare us to some of the big communication agencies. So we do rely on having really strong partnerships with different people as well to bring to life whatever challenge and opportunity we're working on.
Yeah. Now I just heard your 15-minute reminder come up there that you have this training session with this new brand in 15 minutes. So I'm not going to keep you much longer. We'll squeeze one more question in before I let you go. Now, of course, all of your clients are different, from one client to the next. So this question will be kind of could go any direction, but generally, if a startup company came to you and they wanted to develop a new brand to make an impact, where would be the 3 core areas that you would look to make sure that they put themselves on the map to get themselves the awareness that they need to take off?
Okay. So the first thing is always start with your consumer. So really, really understand your consumer, what makes them tick, and think quite personally as well. Observe them. Don't just rely on data. So I mentioned earlier about ethnographic research and how I was trained in that early in my career, and it's really useful to chat to consumers, observe consumer behavior, and really get out there and be part of their world, so that you understand the different opportunities or needs of that consumer, and to identify that unmet need that they're looking for. So I think that's the first one. And then once you've identified that, then your role as a brand is then to connect with that opportunity to solve the problem, find a solution for that, for whatever they're looking for, but do it in a unique way that's distinctive to you. So when we're faced with that challenge with new clients or clients we've got, we often look into their history, their founder story, their origin of the company, like find some unique stories that only you can talk about, because that makes you distinctive. If you're going into a very competitive landscape, people will all be talking about the same thing because they've also studied the consumer, they've found the same opportunities. The only thing that can make you unique is by looking a bit inward at your brand, at your company, to find out what's distinctive about your story and the way that you do things. So we'll do that for the brand story, but then when it comes to visually expressing it as well, we'll make sure that we've got distinctive brand assets that help you stand out within that marketplace. So there's a part of that second point is just to make sure that you've got all the key ingredients ready for the third point, which will be make sure you're thinking holistically and that coherent story across all the different channels that you'll be communicating your brand within. So I'd say that would be my third point, is then making sure you're thinking big, about that consistency, but then be prepared to deep dive and focus on details when you need to ensure you get a consistent quality throughout your brand world.
Mate, I wish I was sitting in on your chat with your new client at the moment, just to kind of get an insight into your world and your thorough processes. But it's been really enjoyable to get a kind of insight into your world, where you've come from, and the work that you're doing. If anybody wants to get in touch with you or learn more about Design Bridge, where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, like you said earlier, go to the website. You can see some of our work, and also my contact details are on the website, or find me on LinkedIn as well. Always open to chatting to people. So weirdly, how me and you ended up getting in contact right through LinkedIn.
It. You just reached out to me. Yeah, reached out to me for some of the content.
Yeah, loved your content and appreciated it. So sent a message to you, and that's how we start connecting. And I'm open to that all the time.
Absolutely. I'm sure if we sat down for a beer, we could keep going and going and going. And if I'm ever in Shanghai or Singapore in any near future, I'll be sure to hit you up. But Tom, thank you so much for taking the time, and I hope to speak to you again in the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Tom.
Cheers, mate.
We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to learn more brand strategy techniques to level up your skills, make sure you check out brandmasteracademy.com. There's plenty of free resources and premium content for you to download and get you going. If you'd like to join our Facebook group full of like-minded brand strategists, all learning from each other, then find us by searching for the Brand Strategy Community, where you can find exclusive content for members as well. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to give us an honest review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listened, and make sure you tune in for the next episode of the Brandmaster Podcast.